Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled P-O-P-P-I-E. You can figure out how to spell Daniel yourself. You're an adult, I would assume. If you want to, you can check out my website. You can check out all of these podcast episodes there as well if you want to go through it in that way. It just depends on what you like. You can check out my book, The Ninth Hour. You can also check out my serialized novel, One Last Toast for Ebenezer Fleet. So if you are new, that serialized novel is free, right? So why not? Check it out if you like it. Maybe you'll like my other stuff. I think it's always good to have the ability to check something out or check a new writer out because you never know. You want to be able to see whether you like that writer before you jump in and you spend that 99 cents, I'm just kidding, but it is good. I think it's really good when people put things out for people to read that are free. I think there is, before I get into the word of the week, I think there is a trend of books being devalued in today's culture, but at the same time, there's a lot of work, for a lot of writers, it takes a long time before they get to a point where they're making a significant amount of money off their books. So when you just start out, you're making barely anything off your books and you're trying to price it really low. And that's just how buying and selling things work. If there are tons and tons of books on the market and they are decent, you have all these self-published books. If you have all these self-published books to wade through, people are going to have to price their books lower so people try them out. There's other stuff to go with the pricing, but if people expect books to be really low, or it's like supply and demand. If there's a huge supply, then the price is going to go low. If there's a huge demand, then the price is going to go really high, or the amount of people buying that book is going to go really high. So you actually see this in the beginning of Amazon and self-publishing. You have two instances of books that exploded, and they were put on Amazon before Amazon got filled with books, right? Self-published books, or books in general, even though Amazon was a bookstore, but before it got filled with self-published books. There is the Aragon series, which I believe he put out, I'm almost certain, as a self-published book, and then there's 50 Shades of Grey, and what happened is there was nobody in that space, but there were readers, so you had a very low supply, you had a very high demand, and then it just exploded because everybody started reading these books. So that happens in certain cases. I believe it happened on YouTube as well. You had a smaller YouTube space. Now everybody's on YouTube. You had a smaller YouTube space, and then it was easier to get bigger on YouTube because less people were uploading. It was viewed in a different way. It was sillier videos. I miss those times when YouTube was a lot of silly videos, but I think there's a lot of value to having a lot of information, people putting out what they think about something. I think that's valuable as well. So the price of books is just supply and demand. I don't think that you can price your books higher, and if you write really well and you get an audience, people are willing to pay you more, right? And I'm not trying to say, hey, try to get as much money out of people as possible. I'm just saying that you put a lot of work into what you do. You should get paid for what you do, but you have to show people that you're good enough, right? Which is why I think it's good to put free stuff out, because if somebody says, hey, I like this, I'll buy this. Why not? I'll try this other stuff this person reads. I think it's a good idea, and I think that we as writers we're in a unique position that I don't think existed in the past. And the unique position we're in, and maybe I'll have a whole podcast episode about this, even though it's not necessarily the philosophy of writing. The unique position we are in nowadays is that we have a direct link to people who like our work in a way that nobody else really did in the past. You had to go through, you could publish it yourself. But even if you published it yourself in the past and spent a lot of money doing it, you didn't have a direct link to the fans in the same way, right? So if I want to, I could create a Facebook page and I could have, this is a fan page, and I hang around this page and people talk to me and I talk to them directly. Or, you have Twitter, you have all these different social media things. People can, if I have this up on YouTube or if you do a live stream on some streaming platform, people can talk to you as you're streaming. So it takes that barrier away. Most people didn't self-publish in the past. Most people went through a publisher, and the publisher did all the work, and the publisher connected them to readers because the publisher definitely had knowledge about the readership. But nowadays there's no publisher between you and the readers. And I think that readers, a lot of readers like that. And I think a lot of people who are looking for books or looking for music like the fact that there's a direct link, or there can be a direct link between themselves and the person creating what they like. So I think there's a much more intimate connection to the fans, which I think is a very good thing, because we are all human, and writers are certainly human. They're not above anybody else. I've talked about that in the past as well. And since writers are no better than anybody else, they just happen to do something differently. They decide to make decisions and go out and write books. And it does take a certain amount of veracity to do that. But at the same time, they're just regular people. They're just doing something. They're just trying something. A lot of these self-published authors are going out on a limb and taking a lot of time to do what they're doing. Not me. I only write about 3 minutes a day, but these other authors. But I think that's really cool, and I think that if you can make those connections to the people who like your work, they're more likely to spend retail prices. They'll buy something for a retail price that they'd buy somewhere else. Because they like you more, because they actually know you better. Not that they know you personally. Not everybody can know you, especially if you're selling like 20,000 books a year. That's a little different, but it definitely is a smaller group. You can actually do a good job of connecting to that amount of people. It's a lot harder when it gets higher and higher and higher. Our word of the week is syntax, and you probably already know what this is. The word of the week, syntax is the arrangement of words and phrases to create well-formed sentences in a language. So it's how words and phrases are arranged in a language according to the language's rules. But I'm actually going to get into the etymology of this. It comes from two Greek words, or it might be a prefix and then a suffix. So sun, I don't speak Greek, so I don't know how to say Greek words. Sun means together, and tasein means arrange. So together, arrange together, or together arrange, however you want to put it. So it's related to the word. Well, it has the word together, and then it has this idea of sequencing things, putting something in sequence. So the word syntax hasn't really changed since its original meaning. It does come from the Greek, like I said. So in Greek, you'd have syntaxis, and the original Greek. I didn't actually check on how long ago this was that this word originated. I don't know how long ago this word originated. But the syntaxis, which is the Greek, it means a putting together in order, an arrangement, or a grammatical construction. So very close. Words that remain pretty much the exact same word and don't morph into other words are very interesting to me. And I think that there are two different types of words that don't morph into other words. There's the word that gets used constantly, right? There's the word that is in the daily lives of people. It's almost in every single daily life. Everybody knows the word. They use it so much. This would be words like water, probably. I know that the word ox has the root word of ox goes back to as far back as we know in the history of English. Pretty much the first language we know, like the great grandfather of English, way back when. And the word ox is really similar to what we have today for ox. I think bee is also really similar. And I think these words were used so much that there wasn't a lot of the ability to change the meaning of the word, because everybody knew what they were. First of all, they're connected to a physical thing. They're connected to a physical thing, which is really helpful. And they are also used very often. So if you hear a word often, and you hear, if you have a group of people and they split up and they use the same word they use the same words for something, if they come back together, they're going to know, oh yeah, that makes sense. We have an ox here. We have an ox here. And there's oxen, that's what I'd use, all around the world. There's cows and different farm animals, livestock all around the world, so it's not going to change much. So that's the one thing, the words that are used a lot. And then there's the words that I think are extremely specific, and they're extremely field specific. They're specific to a field, and they don't get into the regular vernacular, right? And I think these words also remain the same because, first of all, they're not brought out into pop language, right? They're not used by the public very often. They're used by this small insular group of people. They're not spread very widely. Because they're not spread very widely, they don't have the chance to change. And the group that understands these words maintains those words because they're often experts in this area, and it's important when you're an expert in an area to define what you're talking about. If you are someone who studies grammar, which I'm not. So if you're a grammarian, you know a lot more than me, and I certainly know that. But if you study grammar, you need syntax, the word syntax, to mean the same thing 100 years from now, right? Because that's going to help every grammarian from here on out if you can keep that word meaning the same thing. It's also a very specific meaning. And I keep on going on about all this stuff. All right, our accidental essence. I've got how many pages? 1, 2, 3, 3.5 pages, which often isn't the case, of podcast notes that I'm going to be going through, that I'm talking about, the thing I'm talking about. I'm not going to just read them. But I have like 3.5 pages, so this might end up being a two-parter, which I haven't had a two-parter in like more than a year, so that's great. But I'm actually going to be talking about history in this podcast episode, and I'm actually going to be talking about the importance of knowing history. And you might be thinking, well, some of you who like history are like, yeah, history can be a great inspiration for ideas in my book. George R.R. Martin, I think it's annoying to say the full thing because it's like J.R.R. Tolkien. It's just like I can't say those two R's together. It doesn't work. But George Martin, the guy who wrote Game of Thrones, I know took a lot of ideas from history. So history can be a font of many different ideas. But I'm not just going to be talking about that. I'm not going to be talking about, oh, you can find this idea and that idea. I'm actually going to be talking about how history can improve your writing, right? Understanding history can improve your writing. And I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. I think history is fascinating, but I think that there's a broader relevance to knowing it and understanding it. There's a difference between knowing something and then understanding it. So if I study psychology, I could know the basic Freudian ideas. We'll take that. So we have id, ego, superego. We have all the different stages. We have different things like that. We have the suppression. We have projection, which happens unbelievably often. Maybe he was right about that, but projection is, I'm sure I'm guilty of it as well, but projection happens so often. It's kind of crazy. But you have all these different facets of Freud's theory. It goes into more, and you can know the different parts of Freud's theory, but it's different to know Freud's theory. It's different than understanding it, right? I can memorize a list of United states, or I can memorize every country on earth, the name of every country, and I can memorize the flag of every country. I can memorize their capital. I can memorize the different little facts about them. There's a difference between knowing the country. There's a difference between knowing the facts and understanding it. I have a friend who has traveled widely, right? A lot more than I have. He spent long amounts of time in other countries, and he has the idea that you can't really understand other cultures, right? I think he would, I don't know if he would say this exactly, but I think this is what he understands. So he's like, there are certain cultures you can understand because your culture is very parallel to their culture. I think he would say this, and if you're listening, you can definitely correct me. Feel free, because I'm just guessing at this point. But he spent some time in China, and there's cultures that didn't develop. They didn't develop in the same way. So you have like European cultures have a very the culture of Europe is very connected. It was all connected to Christianity, and before that it was connected to Rome, right? And so for more than 2,000 years, the culture of Europe has kind of hung together. And then there's certain areas that weren't as affected for that long. They've been around and connected for 1,500 years or longer, maybe about 1,800 years, something like that. So there's been almost 2,000 years, and in some places more than 2,000 years of culture, connected culture in that area of the world, right? And if you have cultures that are connected to one another, they share ideas, they share technologies, they share ways of doing things, they share food, different things like that. But if you separate cultures, the farther cultures get away, especially in the past, the more cultures are going to diverge, the more cultures are going to do different things. It's kind of like languages, if you have two groups of people and you have them pretty close together, they're going to share a lot of features of language. You see this in English. I don't think you see this as much in French, but the English part of England was taken over by the Normans. I don't remember the exact time period, but the southern part of England was taken over by the Normans. The Normans were French. They imposed French on the English, and then the English took those French words into the English language. You also see this today with the sharing of a language between cultures that share culture, right? Between countries that share culture. Two countries that I believe share a lot of culture with each other. Their cultures are very different, but they share each other's culture, right? They share each other's music. They share each other's movies, video games, different things like that. Two cultures that I think I do this a lot, that actually have a lot of cultural exchange, are Japan and the United States. Europe and Japan also probably share a lot, but I think that the United States pushes so much culture out onto the world that I think that there's probably more going out from the United States to Japan than there is from other European countries, right? But Japan has a huge influence on United States culture. There's Pokemon. First of all, Pokemon, right? That's from Japan. You have things like, Naruto? I think you say, I don't know. I've never gotten into it. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry if you like it. You've got things like Hello Kitty, I think is Japanese, if I can remember exactly. And if you want to lump, like, Korea and Japan are very close, and Korea also shares a lot of culture with the United States, even though it's this tiny little country on a peninsula. But Korea, you have a car company, Kia, which has boomed in the United States. There's so many Korean cars. There's a lot of Toyotas, which is a Japanese company. And there's a lot of other things shared. You have Nintendo being shared, and then the United States pushes stuff out to the world in general. There's just a lot of culture pushed out by the United States, such as our movies, and we have different companies like software companies, different things like that. I'm not going to get into all that because there's just a lot to sort through, and it's easier to see what's coming this direction than see what's going out in that direction because I don't live there. But two cultures can be more connected, and they learn from each other because they're closer together in some way, right? If two countries trade, their cultures are going to be more similar than two countries that have never even no chance of connecting to each other. If two languages are right next to each other, they're going to pick up different bits and pieces from the other language, just because you probably have to speak that other language to communicate, or at least you have to speak some pidgin at the very least, and you're going to probably incorporate some of your words and some of their words. You're going to bring some of their words into your language. They're going to bring some of your words into their language as well. But my friend has this idea that, so two cultures, so you have the United States and then you have China, two cultures that developed pretty far away from each other, and are very divergent in the way they do things. And my friend, who I think that he probably has a pretty good point, he does not think you can completely understand another person's culture. And I would say that he probably believes you can get closer to that if it's a culture that's closer to your own. But I think he doesn't believe you can actually get into that same mindset exactly as somebody who has grown up in that culture, as somebody who knows that culture. As I was saying before, there's a difference between knowing and understanding. That's why I have those two things within the title of this episode. So in terms of what my friend understands, he can know all the different parts of the Chinese culture, but he's not going to understand it fully. And that's where I'm getting at. He's not understanding that culture fully. So we want to know something, but we also want to understand it at the same time. So with history, you can know history and you can understand history. So I can know like how, let's go back farther. I can know that in, what exactly was that? Like 1092 or 1062, the Eastern Orthodox and the Western Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox and the Western Church split. I say Eastern because it's called the Eastern Orthodox Church. The East and the West Church split, right? I think it was 1062 or something like that, 1052. I don't know the exact date, but those two, it might have been like 942. Those two churches split. I know that I know when it happened, I can have people feeding me information, but there's a difference between me having a lot of information about that and me actually understanding the nuance of why it actually happened, right? And the ramifications of why that happened. So we want to not just know history. We want to actually understand what was going on and why it was going on, and also why it affects us today. And some people, like I said before, some people are thrilled. Some people are like, history is awesome. And I'm one of those people. I think it's really interesting. I want to do more reading about history. It's something that I think it's enriching to my life. It helps me with understanding things, why things are today. I think it makes me more grateful about stuff. And some people are like, they're thrilled about that. And some people think it's a complete bore. But I think that even if you think it's a complete bore, I think it's something that you should look into. I think it's something that you should make a part of your life. It's like eating vegetables, A lot of vegetables don't have a lot of flavor, but those vegetables are good for you, and you should eat your vegetables, and you're probably going to eventually like your vegetables. If you're someone who isn't a big history person, I would direct you toward Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, because he does it in a very interesting way. At least I think it is. So check that out. So one thing I've noticed is that young people, and if you're a young person, I'm not trying to be mean or anything, young people are naive and gullible. And it is not the fault of young people. And the younger you are, the more naive and gullible you are likely to be. And there are certainly very shrewd young people, and there are certainly gullible people, older people. But if you have more life experience, it's more likely that you have learned things young people haven't, and you're not going to fall into the trap of believing everything you hear. I know that when I was younger, I was more gullible than I am now. I know that in 10 years, I'm going to be wiser than I am today, right? So everybody is gullible to a certain point. It depends on who's talking to me too. But young people in general are gullible, and it's not their fault, right? If you don't do this, because this isn't a nice way to live, if you present yourself in a way that is appealing to young people and you have some age, right? It depends on the young person. It depends on who you are. But if you are someone who is a little bit older than them and someone they think is cool, do young people use the word cool anymore? I know cool has been around since like the 70s, and I've used it throughout my whole life. But is that still part of the slang? I'm getting too old for this. But young people, if they view you as cool, right, they view you in the right way, in a positive way, a way that they like you, and if you tell them things, there is a high likelihood that they're going to believe you if you speak with credibility, right? This goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the podcast with getting a book out and people like your books and they buy your books. It's kind of the same social dynamic going on. You create a relationship of some sort with these young people. It could be you actually knowing them. It could be you being a internet personality or a celebrity of some sort, or you putting out a podcast and trying your best. And if you develop, and the younger you are, so if you are connecting to someone who's 12, which it needs to be in the right context, because that can be really weird, right? If you're connecting to a teenager, if you're connecting to anybody probably younger than yourself, it probably should be in a correct context. Otherwise, you'll come across as creepy and weird, and you're probably going to get yourself into trouble. But say you make something for someone younger, like you make videos for somebody younger, you write books for somebody younger. If you have good rapport with those people, if you tell them something and you're telling them something in a way that is, you're telling them seriously, right? You're like, this is how the world works. And you're telling them seriously, they're likely to trust you, right? Because you've built up trust with them. First of all, like I said, don't do this if you are malicious or if you know you're lying, right? There can be people who are misled, right? So I could be telling you information about writing books, and I'm not lying to you, right? I'm not trying to mislead anybody, but I could be completely wrong. Okay, there's a difference between doing that and knowingly misleading somebody. So if you are knowingly misleading somebody, I think it is different than if you just don't know yourself, right? You misunderstand something, you come to the wrong conclusions, so you spread those wrong conclusions. So if you tell young people, especially young people, and you can do this with anybody, but again, as you get older, you should probably be getting a little wiser, a little shrewder. But I see this in I see this in children. I see this in teenagers a lot more. They will believe you, and this is what we call indoctrination, right? Now, all children are indoctrinated. And if you think you're not indoctrinating your children, you are indoctrinating your children. You're still indoctrinating your children because you are passing along ideas to your children. You're doing this passively, right? Some people think, oh, I'm going to let my children be these free spirits. I'm going to let them make their own decisions. I'm going to let them think for themselves, which I think that children should make their own decisions as far as they're able to without destroying themselves in some capacity. And I think they should try to think through things even when they are young children. I think that's good, but I think you should direct them. That's my opinion. And you kind of should be where the buck stops in their lives. And then you slowly release that power as they get older. That's just my opinion. But you indoctrinate your children even if you don't try to indoctrinate your children. There are some people who actively teach their children things. And I'm actually of the opinion that you should actively teach your children things because you have decided to live in a certain way, right? You've decided this is the best worldview. This is the best way to live your life. I'm going to live my life in this way. Therefore, if you think that's the best way, why wouldn't you pass on that way to your children, right? I just don't get it why people think, oh, my children are just going to they're going to have all these ideas and they're going to make their own decisions about everything. And I'm not going to have any input into what they believe. Now, you can't force anybody to believe anything, right? You cannot force someone to believe something. And especially when your children grow up into adults, I think you should allow them to think how they're going to think and not push your ideas on them. I think you should have discussions with them if that's possible, if you have a relationship to do that. But you're going to indoctrinate your children, and I think that if you're going to, no matter what, then you should actively do it. Not to push ideas on your kids. But for me, how I'm going to do it is I'm just going to be like, this is what I found to be the truth. And as my kids get older, I'm going to be like, this is your time to actually become an adult and to make your own decisions, right? There's less decision making with young kids because young kids have mush for brains. Not going to get into that anymore. So you can actively do it or you can not actively do it. And some people will probably disagree with me, but think about it this way. If I have a child and I let that child do whatever they want, I have taken my values and I've made decisions about how I'm going to raise my child. And those decisions have ramifications on how my child acts and what they believe. Children do not need to be told things specifically, right? Children do not need to be told things specifically to learn. If you are someone who's like, I'm going to let my child decide what they're going to do, and you are someone who drinks a bottle of liquor every single night, children learn by seeing a lot. Your child is more likely that they're going to be like, well, that's a normal thing to do. Drinking one big bottle of liquor a night is a normal thing to do. Now, that's a big issue, right? Of course, you shouldn't do that, and your child shouldn't see that, and your child shouldn't learn that. If you think a specific way, if you talk to your spouse or you talk to your friends in a specific way, your child's going to pick up on that. They have ears. They can understand what you're saying. If you decide to go specific places, if you work out, your child's more likely to exercise because they have that model. Even if you try to avoid making your child see you, if you try to make it so that your child never sees you do anything except eat and sleep, your child's going to still pick up on how you treat them. If you're mean to your kid, they're going to pick up specific things about who they are as a person based on how you treat them, right? If you're mean to them, they're likely to have issues with how they view themselves, and you have passed on a value of meanness. You think it's not important to be nice to someone else or to be kind to someone else. So you indoctrinate your child no matter what, right? You can do it passively, you can do it actively. Again, the reason why you do it, no matter if you try it or not, is because you do certain things in your life, and kids learn from modeling. There's this whole thing is if you want your kids to learn something, actually practice that thing, and your kids will, or if you want your kids to behave in a specific way, practice that specific thing, and your child will learn. My sister-in-law, one of her kids, calls there calls her, so my sister-in-law's kid calls my sister-in-law Momio, and the reason why is because my sister-in-law called her husband Daddy-o to her kids. So the kid learned, oh, this is how you address your parents, Daddy-o and Momio. So she calls her mom Momio because that's what my sister-in-law modeled. That's something very small, but the kid picked up on it. Kids are not stupid. Okay, kids have a very limited understanding of the world, but they're very good at learning. Does that make sense? Now, for those of you who think that I'm not going to teach my children anything, someone else is going to teach your children if you don't teach your children, okay? Someone is going to teach your child, so why shouldn't you be the one to actually have input into how what your child believes and how they live? Especially since you already made those decisions for yourself. You grew up, you figured stuff out, you found, hey, this is a really good way to live. This is, I think, the best path to follow. Why wouldn't you share those things? And you can always work out the kinks. You can always be like, this is the best path that I found to follow, but you're going to have to make your own decisions for yourself. Now, one thing about children being naive and indoctrination of children is that if you can control what children learn, on the whole, you can actually change a whole society in a generation. There have been other people who have been malicious in the past who figured this out, namely Nazism, right? Nazism figured out, Hitler figured out, if we can get the children to believe this, we can get the whole society to change. You can flip a whole generation if the parents have no input and you have control of what the kids are learning. I'm not in favor of that at all. I think parents should teach their children and should be the primary influence on their children, and we can always take those. I think most parents want to do what's best for their children, and even if it's a bad situation, those parents are trying to do what's best for their children. And if the child looks back and sees, how did my parents sacrifice, or what did my parents do to help me? I think that in most cases, kids are going to be like, my parents had a hard life and that they've done what they could, But I think that most parents should raise their children. I think there's certain cases where parents are abusing their child or something like that, that maybe there needs to be something done about that. But in most cases, I'm in favor of parents raising their kids, because then you don't have this mass education of children in line with one specific thing. Because if children are only educated by like a centralized group, then that centralized group can teach kids whatever they want. And it's good to have different ideas, and it's good when a group so small doesn't have so much power. And this happens in other situations as well. I believe the communist movement also they also directed their efforts toward the youth. You see this a lot today as well with communist movements or certain radical movements. There's a lot of young people in those movements, and the reason why there's a lot of young people in those movements is because it's likely their parents didn't have a lot of input into, hey, this is what I believe and this is why. But it's also probably the case that they're naive and they build rapport with these people. These people are nice to them. They're a part of that group. I think a lot of young people like being the outsiders, and then they start to believe it because they're exposed to it. They're exposed to the arguments of it, and eventually they're like, this is who I am now. If you know history, then you can see this happening in different parts of history, sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. If there is something that is true and it is widely taught, then that is going to be good, right? If it actually is true, there's certain things that are debatable, and I think those things, I think pretty much everything should be up for debate. And the reason why I think it should be is because if you start to say this is absolutely true and there is absolutely no debate on this, well, what if that's not actually true? And we've decided that there is absolutely no debate on this, and maybe somebody will, if we allow even for bizarre debates in our society, right, there might be somebody who comes up and is like, we've held this to be true for a very, very, very long time. I think it's not actually true, and this is why, and they have a really good argument for it, and they have all this evidence and all these different things. They have all this support for why they think it's not true. Maybe we should step back and be like, maybe that's right. Now, just because somebody makes an argument for something doesn't make it valid. but I think there should be the openness to bring in those ideas and see what those proponents of those ideas are saying. If you look at the youth, and this is really why I'm talking about the youth. Now, I don't know why this happened. I don't know why this happened, but I think it's more widespread, and I think it's probably, I think this is something that is likely to just be a part of how people work. You know, I don't know if this happened because parents were neglectful of teaching their children, or if people just have different passions and interests. I'm guessing that to a certain degree, it's probably the fact that parents neglected to teach their children because those parents don't really care about these areas. They don't find them interesting. They don't like them. But it's parents and schools and society in general, I think, have neglected teaching children and have neglected maintaining this idea of teaching history. That was a lot of word salad there. I'm really sorry. They don't teach history. That's what I'm saying. Society in general doesn't do a good job of teaching history. Society in general, most people are not interested in history, and because most people aren't, I think it's most, because most people aren't interested in history, you have to do extra work to get people actually interested in that thing. So there's been a neglect of teaching of that, and because there's been a neglect, I think there's ramifications for that. Because of that neglect right off the bat, and this goes back to what I was talking about first, people don't know or understand history. And even those who know and understand history to a certain degree, I don't think know it to the extent that they should. And I would actually lump myself in this group. I think that I should know, and I know a significant amount of information about history, but I think I should know more. I think that history and understanding history is so important in terms of how we relate to others, in terms of how we live in a society, in terms of what we do in the future, in terms of how we write as well, even though that's something that isn't as important as these other things. I think that understanding and knowing history is so important that I don't even do it enough, right? I like history. I delve into it quite a bit, but at the same time, I don't do it enough. The ironic thing about knowing history is that if we actually knew history, we would know that we should understand it. We would know that we should know and understand it. And I'm at 40 minutes right now. So I'm going to actually stop it right there. I think that it's going to go faster. You know, this is just a really interesting topic, and I have a lot to say about it. And I like having little bunny trails to go into a few different things, and I've kind of done that today as well. But yeah, I think that if we knew history, we'd actually know that we should understand it. So ironic. It's weird how those things work. There's this phrase that I guess I probably have heard it in the past, but it's a phrase I think is very important to remember in your life. I think it's something that could actually help change your life in a lot of big ways, is that you don't know what you don't know. And I know the person that I heard it from applied it to finances and investing and different things like that. You know, if you don't actually have the knowledge about something, like, you're not going to know about it at all. You don't even know you don't know about it. You just you live your life without this knowledge. It's like if you didn't know how to read, you wouldn't know what you're missing. And I think that people who are big writers can understand that. If you never heard music, you'd never know what you're missing. If you never had any of these artistic things in your life, you wouldn't know what you wouldn't know. And there's bigger things than even those artistic things in your life. If you have no understanding of how to talk to other people, you don't even know where to begin, right? You don't even know where to begin. And this is where it goes back. It's ironic. I think it's kind of humorous. But if you are someone who doesn't know history, if we as a society don't know history, we don't even know that we should know it. We don't know what we don't know. And I'm just going to leave it there. And we'll continue next week with the same topic. I guess we're going on. All right. Peace out. Congratulations. You got to the end of my podcast. So you either had to listen to my voice, or you had to listen to my voice and watch my face, which I don't envy you. Let's just say that. But if you're someone who likes this podcast and you're thinking, you know, I'd like to support him in this podcast or the other creative things he's doing, creative things I'm doing, you know, there's a few things you can do, because some people don't know what they can do to support people who create stuff. So these are the few things you can do that will really, really help me. First of all, check out my website. Check out the other things I'm doing. Second, comment on things, share them, like them, subscribe. Subscribe if you haven't already. And the third thing you can do is give reviews on different places, all right? So the biggest thing for this podcast is going on to iTunes, giving it an honest review, telling people why you like it, telling people why you hate my voice, why you hate my face, but telling people why they should really check it out, despite the fact that I have so many failings in terms of looks and voice. Other than that, if you want to check out my books, grab a copy of the book and listen to the serialized novel. Give digital copies away. That's a really big thing too. I always want to give you something that is valuable to you. I always want to give someone listening to this podcast something that's going to stick with them, or a book that they can actually own. And you can own that book for very, very cheap. So go check that out on Amazon. The different things I said: subscribe, upvote, comment, share, and definitely give it a review on iTunes. All right, as always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good.
3, 4.